Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to the Cyber Policy Center seminar. Today, really excited to have a special guest, Nicole Perlroth, who will be joined by Nate Lowe, who's not only one of our JD students here, but also a frequent attender here at the CPC. Before I introduce Nicole and our fireside chat, I want to point out that Rob Willer will be giving a talk next week. Rob not only does some of the world's best work on polarization and the role that technology and psychology play in that, but also is doing really amazing work on how AI, generative AI in particular, can transform social sciences. So should be a fantastic talk next week. Nicole, who maybe doesn't need that much of an introduction, wrote a fantastic book. It's sitting in my office. It has one of the better titles, I think, ever. This is How They Tell Me How the World Ends. She's deeply part of the Stanford community. She was just letting me know that her father was a professor here, and she was born at Stanford Hospital. So very excited to have her now be in the Manning faculty room for the Stanford seminar, CPC seminar. So let me turn it over to Nate and Nicole, and please join me in welcoming them. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for everyone for being here. Nicole, thank you so much for taking the time. We know you're very busy and doing important work, so we appreciate it. First thing, unfortunately, there are a lot of things to be worried about these days. Why should cybersecurity be one of them?
Well, first of all, thank you for the great introduction, and thank you, Nate, and everyone here for having me here today. I live 10 minutes away, so I say yes to everything Stanford asks me to do, but it's a particular honor to be here with this crowd today, so thank you so much. So why cyber? It is amazing to me just in the last, and this is not a canned answer, and I didn't come prepared with any canned responses today because you're in the, we're all in the same Stanford family here, but it's amazing. Cybersecurity is now everywhere I look. I mean, the Brian Johnson assassination, you know, how do executives now think about not just their physical protection, but their digital protection is now coming up. What's happening with Doji and, you know, who has access suddenly to our most sensitive payment systems and nuclear capabilities in labs in some cases, and just personal identifiable information like our social security numbers. And it is everywhere, and it's everywhere, everything all at once is the nightmare scenario that I basically laid out in the book. And that is now a common phrase that you're going to hear inside government, is that particularly what we're seeing from nation state actors embedding in our critical infrastructure is something like what we saw with Colonial Pipeline, that ransomware attack, but at scale, where it's the everything everywhere all at once hacking scenario. And I think it is, I liked when I mentioned that, and then I'll let you ask the other questions. But when I mentioned that, what I really want people to understand is that it's scary, you know, but it's important to break it down. And I think one thing that we have to face, and this was a big lesson coming out of the reporting for the book, is we're all in each other's stuff now. You know, I have reported on how US Cyber Command was hacking into Russia's grid and making a loud show of it, really to say to Russia, hey, if you ever want to do to us what you did to Ukraine where you turn the lights off, we're just going to turn around and do the same thing back to you. So you're going to want to be pretty careful about what you do next. And we know Russia has gotten into our infrastructure. You know, there hasn't been any reporting about what the US does outside of, you know, the Russian grid story that I wrote with David Sanger, but we can assume it's not the only place. And now we're really seeing, especially since 2020, PRC-enabled hackers coming into our infrastructure. So I think the most generous explanation now is mutually assured digital destruction is the era we're in. But I think we don't talk enough about the psychological pressure that would put on us. And, you know, if we couldn't get clean water tomorrow, or we couldn't get gas, what appetite would we have as Americans to care about a conflict 7,000 miles away? What appetite would we have then to support Taiwan? Is really how we should be thinking about it. And so cybersecurity, it's more than just data security. It's really like, how do we secure our ability to make brave decisions? How do we secure the ability to protect democracy and free speech? Like, all of these things over the last decade and a half have had a cyber element to them.
No, I think the critical infrastructure piece is really, really important. So I want to get into that in a little bit. But first, your book is predominantly about the zero-day market. So for those who may not know, can you just talk about what a zero-day is and then sort of why you wrote the book and chose that topic?
Yeah, so a zero-day is if I am a programmer at Apple and I'm writing the software for your iOS mobile operating system, and I introduce a number where it shouldn't be, a missing hyphen, just a mistake in the code. It could really be anything. And I roll out that software to millions of people, and a hacker finds it, and Apple doesn't know that they've made this mistake. That's the zero-day. And if I can write a program to exploit that mistake, to get inside the iOS software to read your text messages or track your location or turn on and record any noise you make, et cetera, that's called a zero-day exploit. And what I was learning was that there was a very large and burgeoning secret market for zero-day exploits. There were increasingly a number of brokers who advertised their pricing to hackers online, where they were advertising price lists like at the time it was $1 million for that zero-day exploit I just described in your iPhone. It might be $2 million for the same capability for an Android phone, because more of the world uses Android. And the prices were going up and up and up. And who were the buyers of these things? Well, the buyers who were able to pay that high price were usually governments or their intermediaries. So governments were paying hackers or paying hackers through intermediaries to turn over these basically exploitable bugs or programs to exploit these bugs. And then they were hoarding them, and they were adding them to sort of like a big stockpile, so that if they wanted to spy on a terrorist's iPhone or track someone's movements or what have you, they had that capability. So that had been happening for a long time, but then a couple things started to shift. One, we Americans were all also using iPhones. And I just couldn't really wrap my head around this one basic fact, which was, we pay taxes into government so they keep us safe. But in this one regard, in cybersecurity, they were willing to kind of leave us less safe to preserve their own espionage advantage. The other thing was that it wasn't just your iOS software anymore, your iPhone. This market started to creep into the software that we plug into our critical infrastructure. So Schneider Electric, Siemens Industrial Software, all of that software as part of Software Eats World was making its way into our grid, our pipelines, our water systems, our telecommunication systems, our weapon systems. And the market really started reaching into those systems as well. And so I got certain point where I was just fascinated from a moral lens perspective on this issue of, wait a minute, doesn't this ultimately leave us less safe? But also for my little perch at the New York Times, I was covering new attacks every week that were creeping into the critical infrastructure. It was clear that there were a lot of actors who were very motivated, let's say, to get into our dams and our pipelines and our oil and gas networks. So I felt like, what? I think we need to call this out, that this market exists. I think we need to have probably a larger national conversation around this. Also, we need to talk about why these bugs exist in the first place. Why are we rolling out crappy code that can be exploited and used back against us in the worst, scariest of ways. Because where I was sitting in Portola Valley, covering all this for the New York Times, all I was hearing from Silicon Valley were the two Marks. Mark Zuckerberg saying, move fast and break things, get it out, ship it, ship. We'll worry about all the mistakes later. But I knew from my perspective that included a lot of bugs. And then the other Mark Andreessen, who was talking about let's let software eat the world, software eats world. So those two things meant, okay, we're letting software eat the world, we're doing it really quickly, and we're giving everyone food poisoning in the process. So we need to talk about that, that's sort of like the root cause of this. And I felt really strongly that someone needed to tell this story in a way that my mom could understand. I could go and just take my mom by the hand and be like, let me just walk you into this weird 0-day market and where it's all going and why it exists and where the threat landscape is going. Because a lot of people, I think a diplomatic way to say it is, I think if cybersecurity were purely a technical problem, it would have been solved 25 years ago. But it didn't get solved because it's not just a technical problem, which brings me to this audience and why I'm excited to be here. It is not just a technical problem, it's a communication problem, it's an education problem, it's a leadership problem, it's a resource problem, it's all of the disciplines. And so that's why I wrote it for the lay reader. And the nice thing is I'm still getting called into boards to do a lot of board education, because a lot of board members will say, we thought that we were on top of this because we got a briefing from our CISO, our Chief Information Security Officer, every quarter. But to be honest with you, we didn't really know what he was talking about until we read your book.
Yeah, no, I think really important. I want to move now kind of into that critical infrastructure part that you keep harping on, because it's scary. Colonial Pipeline was just kind of the start of it, lines for getting gas and a real concern. So can you talk in the book about Iran mixing up 2 Bowman dams in different parts of the country and how one of them, it could have been really serious and we got lucky. Can you just talk about that story and then where you see that threat growing and if, the kind of operational technology is getting better now?
Yeah, so I think, the technology is always moving and it just is getting faster and faster and faster. And one of the things, just to back up before the Bowman Dam situation, that I spend a lot of time on in the book is Stuxnet. And hopefully most of you now know what Stuxnet is, but just in case, it's the U.S.-Israeli attack on Iran's Natanz nuclear enrichment facility. And it's important to know, and I spend a lot of time on sort of that little, it's weird to call it history because it doesn't seem like it was that long ago, but the reason they did Stuxnet was because Israel was really pressuring the George W. Bush administration to hand over the bunker buster bombs necessary to bomb Natanz. And every simulation that was being done at the Pentagon at the time showed that if we just handed over these bombs and these capabilities, even if we looked the other way, we would get dragged into World War III. And we were already in Iraq and Afghanistan, and the simulations actually showed that we might be so overstretched in the Middle East that we might not actually win these wars. So W said, get me a third option. And the third option was Stuxnet. They took this code, they brought it into the nuclear facility, it jumped into the Siemens industrial software, into those computers that controlled the uranium centrifuges. It spun them up, slept, slowed them down, slept, and over a period of, we don't even know how long, but we assume at least months, if not more than a year, we destroyed, the US and Israel destroyed a fifth of Iran's uranium supply. So I think of it like the digital version of the Manhattan Project, only in reverse, because it was a counter-nuclear proliferation effort at the end of the day. The problem is it got out. And when it got out, it didn't do any harm because, like I like to say, it was clearly designed with some lawyers standing over these people's shoulders, making sure it only did harm at Natanz. But when it got out, it showed the world, no one more than our adversaries, the potential to do harm with code. And 2 years later, we never really gave Iran a lot of credit for developing its own cyber capabilities, but 2 years later, after Stuxnet was discovered, Iranian hackers showed up in Saudi Aramco, and they tried to get into the pipeline networks, and they weren't able to. So they just destroyed everything on the way out, and they decimated their data and left a little bit of a middle finger. They left this image of a burning American flag on their way out. And shortly after that, we started seeing them probe around U.S. critical infrastructure. So the story I tell in the book is that Michael Daniel, who was the White House cybersecurity coordinator at the time under Obama, got the proverbial 3 a.m. phone call from, I think it was John Brennan, I forget now, who said, they're in the Bowman Dam. Now, we have 2 Bowman Dams, probably more, in the United States. One of them is in Oregon, and if you were going to get into those controls and switches and unleash that Bowman Dam, you're talking about a computer-triggered tsunami that would have cost us a lot of lives. So everyone got really worked up over this. Thank God, turns out they were not in that Bowman Dam. They were in a little Bowman Dam that held back like a little creek in Westchester County in New York, and it was just under construction. But the point of that episode was, one, our adversaries have learned that there's a lot you can do in critical infrastructure with code. 2, they're clearly poking around here. But also, there's a lot of room for quick escalation and miscalculation in cyber that we don't really, we have far less of, I should say, in the physical space.
Definitely. And then kind of, moving forward to more recent events, the Salt Typhoon, Volt Typhoon. I agree with you and Jen Easterly. We shouldn't be calling these Chinese threat actors with cute names, but talk about just those hacks and then the implications there and what you're seeing maybe from the private sector in response as well. So,
I spent a lot of time covering Chinese cyber espionage at the New York Times, and it was really hard to cover as a journalist because no one wanted to talk about the fact that they had been breached for a number of reasons. They were worried about their stock price and their reputation, and we do still have this culture that I was admittedly a part of sort of victim blaming when a company gets hit. Our first question is, how could you let this happen? And then the New York Times got hacked by China, and someone on our security team tipped me off to it. It wasn't like I was assigned, but I ended up kind of embedding with the New York Times security team for a period of several months, and then convincing the editors to let me write this story about how we had been hacked by China. And I remember right before, like the week before we went to press, the masthead kind of freaked out a little bit, and they started having second thoughts. And I remember one editor saying, wait, why would we publish this? What good does it? And I remember saying, well, there are a lot of companies out there that have been hacked by China, and we're not the only ones, and none of them want to talk about it, so no one really understands the threat, and we kind of have this unique responsibility to talk about it as a news organization. So that argument won the day, wrote the story, followed it up with a story about APT1, which was the group that had hacked us. David Barbosa, my colleague, who was the Shanghai bureau chief at the time, went to the building in Shanghai, and we identified, here's where this unit is operating from, and that was followed up by indictments. But the thing about it was they were pretty easy to catch. They were really sloppy. They always came in through a spear phishing attack. They always dropped malware. They always moved laterally. We came to spot the patterns pretty quickly. It was just that someone was always clicking on the spear phishing link. And we started calling out this behavior, and I was part of that at the New York Times. And what came of that was not what we thought would come of it. We thought that would be a huge deterrent. And it turns out it wasn't a deterrent. It just caused them to go further underground and to be much more stealthy about how they hacked American entities. And not only that, they changed their targeting. So like I said, we've started seeing a lot of these groups that used to really be in it for IP theft and personal data collection in bulk in some cases, now really coming for targets that have no PII, no intelligence value at all. The only reason you would be in these systems is to maybe do a little bit of damage one day. And they're coming in a way that's really hard to catch. In some cases, they're just using usernames and passwords, and they're coming in, and then they're just acting like any other ordinary employee logging in from their home office. They're not dropping malware. None of their telltale usual signs are there. They're doing what we call living off the land. They're just making sure that they're in, they're staying in, and why, when, we don't know. They're also coming in through home routers. So they're hacking into these unpatched, Cisco routers that we all use for our homes and sometimes offices. And they're coming in that way. So if you're a water treatment facility in Oregon, and you see some weird traffic coming in from a server in China, like we were 15 years ago, you'd say, oh, I have to block that. But if you see some weird traffic coming in from a home down the street, you're probably not going to be that suspicious about it. So that's what we're seeing right now with some of these threats. That one, the one that's coming into critical infrastructure, Microsoft calls Volt Typhoon. These naming conventions are really annoying. CrowdStrike has its own naming convention. And it's sort of like whoever gets there first and talks about these threats the loudest, that's what we all end up calling them. But I do think it's important to start pointing out who the actor is for a lot of this activity. And in this case, it's the People's Republic of China. And Salt Typhoon is the more recent one we're talking about on our telecommunication infrastructure. So, they got into, I think we're up to 9 telecom providers, but all the major ones, Amazon, not Amazon, AT&T, Verizon, all hit. Microsoft discovered it at first. And they've been in for so long, and they're in such a way that it's really hard to eradicate them. So as far as we know, they're still in. We know that they hacked the lawful wiretapping system, where government basically provides a court order that says that they have the ability to secretly wiretap a customer of one of these major telecommunications companies and do it. So that has huge counterintelligence value for China to see who does the U.S. know who our agents are. What do they know? So it has huge counterintelligence value. We know they spied on Trump and J.D. Vance's phone calls. But, what is the guidance we're getting from government? It's use end-to-end encryption mobile apps for your sensitive conversations. I mean, it's really amazing to me that this is where we are. We're just calling out the threat and then just sort of hoping the American people kind of step up, and then what? I don't know.
So I think we've sufficiently scared everyone in this room, but we'll move on to maybe just talking about you. Why'd you decide to leave the New York Times, and then maybe your time at CISA, which some people might not know too much about, relatively new kind of agency, and then moving into venture as one in Silicon Valley does.
So I was at the New York Times. When I got to the New York Times, Anne Grimes, who was my first journalism professor here at Stanford, when I got the job offer, I think I spoke to you, Anne, and I was like, I don't know if I can do this. This is going to be really hard. And I remember telling I knew nothing about cybersecurity. Why did the New York Times was always my Bible growing up. I was like, okay, if I just go do this and I do my best for 2 years, I can always tell myself I did it. So I was there for almost 12 years. And I always, every year I would write my memo, if you've seen the movie Jerry Maguire, it was like a manifesto I would write in the middle of the night, every year to the masthead saying, we need 12 people to cover cybersecurity. we need someone on Chinese IP theft all day. We need someone on ransomware all day. We need someone on what Iran's doing. We need something on North Korea hacking into our cryptocurrency exchanges. Like, we need 12 people, and I'm just one person, and I'd like to have another child. And every day I was getting called at bath time, or, my phone would go off in the middle of the night, emergency, just always an emergency. Sometimes it wasn't even cyber. I remember being at the Super Bowl in New Orleans, the last time it was in New Orleans, and the lights went out. And I'm enjoying the Super Bowl, and I get this call, like, can you investigate if it's a cyber attack? And, I wasn't sober at the time. So, it was very disruptive, let's say. And so the other thing was the learning curve had been like this, and then it was like this. It was just like, by the end, it was like a new attack, a different day, sometimes the same group, sometimes a slightly different group, sometimes a slightly elevated technique. But it was just like, I joked sometimes I was on the cop beat, like, Target hacked, news at 11, and I was getting tired. I was getting really tired. And I got a phone call from Jen Easterly, I got a phone call from a couple of people in the Biden administration, and they would be working on the cyber EO, the cyber executive order. And they would say, look what we have open on our desks. And it was my book. And they were highlighting, and they put some of my book recommendations into the executive order, and they were doing things that I had hoped someone would do. They blacklisted NSO Group, the Israeli spyware company that I had spent a lot of time outing in a series of abuses with spyware against journalists and dissidents and all sorts of horrible cases. So they were doing the right thing, or at least they were trying to do the right thing. And they said, if you ever want to come in and help us, just say the word. And so that kind of got the gears moving. And then Jen Easterly, who became the director of CISA, which was this nascent cybersecurity infrastructure security agency. We care about security so much, we put it twice in our name. Said that she was creating, or Congress mandated that she create this advisory board. And she said, I really want a journalist on it, because I agree with you that a lot of this is a communication problem. So would you consider doing it? So I talked to my husband, and I decided this is actually the perfect time. The learning curve has been like this. I would like to see if I can help, because there's something that's kind of weird when you get really deep into one subject as a journalist, and you realize you have to call someone up and get a quote on deadline, and then you hear them and you're like, I think that you just quoted something I've written back to me. This is like, I think I'm done here. The awareness piece, I've been doing a lot on the awareness piece. Now I can try it in a different avenue. And, I'll be able to tell my kids, like, it's good to not just write about a problem and call out problems. It's good to try and help solve them. So I went in, and I told them I don't want a security clearance, because then you have to get government pre-publication review, which is a nightmare, my nightmare. And then the first time they were like, okay, Nicole, like, time to get in the skiff. And I go in, and now I can tell you what they told me. They said, Russia's going to invade Ukraine in 3 months. And we're really worried about the potential for cyber blowback. And so for 3 months, like, it was so weird to be a journalist, and still a journalist at heart, go home and then just say things occasionally. And my husband, like, how much gas can we store in the garage without blowing the house up, Or like, we just need a lot more water on premises. And like, maybe we need to stop chlorinating the pool. It just was weird. It was weird. But it was the honor of a lifetime. And the people on that board with me were CISOs at a lot of the major tech companies like Apple, were VCs, were Kevin Mandia, who I had done the APT1 report where we outed that particular unit of the PLA in the hack of the New York Times. So it was all these people I'd interacted with who previously had prepared for me with bug spray, who now I was sitting around a table with them and rolling up our sleeves and saying, like, what can we really do in this space? And it really was an honor. And so it took me out of journalism though, because I was now inside the tent. So I said, okay, like, I guess I'm inside the tent, I will start doing more advisory work. So I didn't even know what that meant, but boards started asking me to come in and would you do board education? Would you speak to our entire staff? And so I started doing that. And then at the end they would say, okay, so, who should we use? Like for, to back up our systems, who should we use for intrusion detection on some of our OT, our critical infrastructure systems? How should we be thinking about, the fact that all our employees now work from home and think of themselves as their own CIO and do whatever they want? Like, how do we secure that? And I just said, I don't know. I'm a journalist. Like, why are you asking me? And then I realized, I need to come up with better answers. So I started looking out, and it turns out I had this really great network that I'd created of sources that were building these solutions. And I realized if I can set up my own cyber moonshot fund and give you the capital you need, I can help drive adoption to that solution. And then, we'll have hopefully helped shift this asymmetrical advantage that all these hackers have on us. And I'll give it a try. I've lived in Silicon Valley my whole life. Like, how hard can this be? So that's what I've been doing for the last year. And I'm having a lot of fun doing it. And just examples of some of the things I've been backing are basically like solutions to the things that terrify me the most. So right now that's AI and deepfakes. So I backed a guy at Berkeley, actually, Hani Farid, who has what I think is the best deepfake detection real-time technology there is on the market right now. And then I've been going out. I went out to John Deere. I actually brought my 6-year-old, which was fun. And we tested it. They created several deepfakes of their CEO, and we tested it against Hani's solution and every other solution on the market, and only Get Real's detected it. So that was good. So now they use Get Real. But, it's just the beginning of the inning. But these are all things that I think are going to be critical needs in the next decade. So that's one. The others are things like trying to secure the AI pipeline, detect manipulation, essentially. And other things like, 90% of the attacks I covered at the New York Times could have been prevented if all the solutions that these victims had in place were working as they should have been working. But they were getting missed because the entity hadn't updated to the latest antivirus version that detected this particular malware, or they just hadn't configured it properly, or their security team was just exhausted because these attacks are happening 24/7 and figuring out the signal to noise ratio is really hard. So, that would be another example of a company I just backed that is looks at the whole security estate using AI and tells you, okay, this has only been deployed in a really shallow way. Enable all these features and do it in this priority list because this is what the attackers are actually doing right now, and contextualizing that. So it's really cool to be out here and actually participating in those solutions.
Yeah, this conversation wouldn't have been as good as it is without the talk about AI right now. So thank you. A lot of great companies. There's always this offense defense debate, right? You're investing in the defensive side. Can you talk a little bit about what we're seeing on the offensive side? And there's the recent reporting that adversaries have used ChatGPT and Gemini to research targets. The North Korean shadow IT, using it to write cover letters to then join organizations and then steal their intellectual property. How have you seen those threats evolving, and that from your company perspective as well?
Well, I would say you can safely say AI is so far being used to augment all the techniques that I covered from the previous decade. So better spear phishing emails, better social engineering attacks. We are seeing deep fakes used to mimic the CFO. when they're requesting wire transfers, and there's been a couple of public cases of that. Scanning for vulnerabilities. Unfortunately, I wrote a whole book that's now irrelevant because I wrote about this human calculus of developing 0 days. Well, now you can use AI to search for and develop 0-day exploits. So we're there. So those are all the things that are happening right now. Specific cases, you just mentioned it. We're seeing North Koreans use deepfake technology and advanced, social engineering techniques and AI-enabled social engineering techniques to apply for jobs, and then get inside the organization and then steal that IP and in some cases monetize it. We're seeing that in ransomware as well. It's only a matter of time before we see a more sophisticated actor kind of deploy those techniques. So that's the scary thing, and I'm pretty scared about it. But the good news is, because I don't like saying all that without talking about the other side of it. The good news is I do think AI is going to be a game changer on defense. So many of these attacks have come in through unpatched, systems. Well, now we have AI to automatically patch all of them and manage that process all of the time. So many of them come in through mistakes in the code. Well, now we have AI to make sure that we're writing secure code. Those are going to up-level us significantly and are quite exciting developments. So, I think of it almost like two robots duking it out in space. Where I really worry the most is on the disinformation. And, when people, I spend a lot of time obviously in cyber. And then when people ask me to rank my worst nightmares, I say, well, actually, cyber is only third on my list. In terms of national security threats, I actually think disinformation is number one. Because how do you solve anything when it's just, you can't even trust that what you're hearing is real? And then number two, I think, is still climate change. And then three is cybersecurity. But on disinformation, what we're seeing right now is, Elon eliminated the trust and safety teams that tracked misinformation and disinformation at X. Zuckerberg just announced they're going to dismantle it at Facebook. Pam Bondi just dismantled the FBI task force that tracks foreign influence campaigns at the FBI. It goes on. And when you've covered some of these things and been targets for it, you learn to spot it more easily, I think, and without, really any proof, because there's no APIs we can plug into to know for sure. Anytime I go on X now, I'm like, I don't know, but I think maybe half this content might be an influence campaign. And that might even be generous. So that's really where most of my worry lies right now.
And kind of relating to that, I'm sure, the recent announcement of DeepSeek, and then I think you and I had a similar reaction of kind of skepticism at first. Can you talk a little bit about that and just how maybe there was general enthusiasm, this is a game changer, but let's peek behind the curtain here and really see what's going on?
Yeah, I haven't had a week to go play with DeepSeek and talk to every expert on it. So I'm sort of a charlatan on this, but when it came out, well, I should say, when it came out, I think there was a lot of cheering happening. We saw Mark Andreessen called it a profound gift to the world because it was open source, and there are a lot more efficiencies in DeepSeek, partly because of the constraints that Chinese engineers had in building it. We'll find out later whether they broke export controls, but they didn't have access to the same advanced microchips that OpenAI does, et cetera. So it was built with these greater efficiencies, and it was open source. Now, I think that there is a worthwhile debate to talk about what does open source mean here, because it is not open source like Wikipedia is open source, which I always find to be the most accessible analogy. You know, it is open weight. Now, that doesn't have the same ring to it, but you can see the weights, but you can't see the training data. As far as I know, you can't replicate the model yourself, which means that it still is in many ways a black box. But it's been rolled out, and it's significantly cheaper to use and to integrate and to build on top of. And I was listening to Hard Fork the other day, and my friends Kevin Roos and Casey Newton talk about, does the fact that it's open source, will that inevitably put it in the PRC's crosshairs? And I actually think no. I think that there was probably, if there was any kind of state nexus at all, and again, this is totally hypothesizing, it would probably be an imperative that it be as open and as accessible as possible so that it was integrated into as many global systems as possible. Because when you back up and look at a map from a macro perspective, you know, it was a PRC priority that Huawei become the global equipment maker, backbone for 5G, for telecom, for everything. And in much the same way that I think it would be an imperative for DeepSeek to be baked into as many systems as possible. And, you know, I think the US government has really done itself a disservice by constantly warning and saying, no one use Huawei. This is a national security threat, both for surveillance and because they could flip a kill switch at any time, without ever providing any evidence to that. And in fact, when I was at the New York Times, David Sanger and I did a story about how the NSA at one point used Huawei as a launch pad to spy on North Koreans and Chinese entities and Iranian entities. So, you know, we don't have the most solid footing to stand on here, especially after a lot of what was disclosed with the Snowden leaks. But I do think, and TikTok, you know, fits into the same thing. I do think there is a real risk in thinking this is a profound gift. I think people need to be very circumspect about how much access or how much they're integrating this into their systems, because it's at a level of complexity that most organizations just don't understand. And it might not be a threat today, but we can't look around these corners. And it is unfortunately, you know, I worry a lot about xenophobia when you talk about these threats. And you have to be very clear, this is not, you know, anything but about China's leadership. But we have to be very real about where the threat stands today, which is that we are seeing Chinese hackers get into our infrastructure, and it's not for fun or for IP theft. So we have to, and our Verizon and our phones and all our private communications. So if they're doing that and that's real, you kind of have to look at DeepSeek with that lens as well. And I don't think we've seen any very real threats that, you know, that it's not being used as an avenue right now, but it would be very naive if we just kind of started rolling DeepSeek into everything that we do.
Well, it makes me optimistic that you're out there investing in the companies to defend us. So thank you. We just want to open it up. If anyone has questions to the room or then online as well, appreciate everyone listening. And thank you again, Nicole. It was great.
Michael Siegel from MIT, Director of Cybersecurity Center at Sloan effort. I just wondered, you began to talk about it. My view of the AI and cybersecurity paradigm in making things better is this asymmetric warfare issue. And that, you know, attackers, for those in the audience, attackers need to find just one place to get in, and defenders need to defend against every possible way in. So some of the solutions that you talk about scale some, but I don't necessarily see them taking that jump to get rid of that, you know, inherent problem. Do you have any thoughts on it? You have any thoughts on really whether that will go away, or?
I mean, it's like the age-old game of cat and mouse. You know, that's how I think about it. I think, you know, we're going to see a lot. Well, we're already starting to see a lot of really exciting AI for red teaming, for example. You know, basically, we used to send these like teams of hackers into a building, and not just to hack it from the outside, but like literally sending people in with construction hats on their heads to come in and just to get that one person, right? To get them to plug in the USB stick. And now we're able to sort of do this with AI in a much sort of cheaper, scalable way. So, I mean, I think it's going to basically take the lowest. I think using these AI systems will take the lowest of the low hanging fruit off the table, hopefully. Because what we talk about is we talk about these target-rich, cyber-poor environments like water treatment facilities. And like every time I drive by a water treatment facility, I stop my car and I look at it and I ask myself, do I think they have even one security person working for them? And the answer is no. Like it's usually like two people who are, you know, sophisticated plumbers, essentially. And so we've had this age-old problem of like, how do we defend those? And when I say we, it's like the government can't even defend them because it's owned by the private sector, and they don't want the NSA, you know, inside those systems. So the government really, in many cases, doesn't even have visibility into those systems, and they don't necessarily have the resources in a lot of cases to even have like one full-time person thinking about this. So I think AI will help at least give them, you know, a very quick up-leveling in their digital infrastructure. Hey, here's all these legacy systems that you're still using that haven't been patched. Hey, like we're noticing, you know, unusual activity over here. Like so many of those systems don't even have anything doing that right now. So I think that will be beneficial. But I think at the higher levels of the stack, we're always going to be stuck in this trap of the offense guys will figure it out how to get in before the defense guys figure out how they did it and how to get them out. And that's just kind of the way of the universe. But
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great.
Anyone else in here? I can check online. Oh, Daphne.
I'll go. So I'm curious your take on the TikTok ban case, just because the ultimate justification that the Supreme Court accepted was the security threat posed by TikTok transmitting data. And that just, to me, seems so minor compared to all the threats that you just described. But you know much more about it. So yeah, I'm curious, like, what would you prioritize above that, if anything, if you were Congress? And like, what do you think of that particular threat?
Well, I think it's been poorly handled, to say the least. What worries me with TikTok, or what worried me the most with TikTok, was a subtle shift in the algorithm where it was almost like a subtle disinformation campaign, and you didn't even know it existed until suddenly you look around and a bunch of people start saying things that would have sounded insane a year ago. And those are really hard to detect. But more recently, I've started hearing some really disturbing examples where someone in a high position of power, and I'm just going to be vague because I recently asked if I could share this, and I was told no, not right now. So I'll just say someone in a high position of power, his wife found out she had been hacked, and when they investigated, it went back to ByteDance servers. So, you know, it is always, to this point, the weakest link. And, you know, maybe in government, we tell people don't use TikTok. I think we do have that ban, right? But maybe someone in their house uses it. And maybe that allows an avenue for a direct breach of some kind. And I have covered many situations, and this was actually in the Snowden leaks. There were a lot of references to China using a really popular gaming company to stage their attacks. There was a case when there was some content on GitHub that the PRC wanted taken down. And what did they do? They launched a denial of service attack at this one GitHub page using all the incoming traffic that was coming into Baidu, turning it around and firing it at this one site. And when I called up Baidu while this was happening, I said, like, what do you have to say for yourself? Your traffic is being used in the biggest denial of service attack we've ever seen. And on the record, they said, we have no comment. And off the record, they said, what do you want me to say? Like, the state is using us to launch this attack and we can't say anything without going to jail. So that's the issue, is that we have these real world examples when these systems based inside China have been used in nation state attacks by the government. And the companies really have no say. So TikTok's been trying to find a way around that by, moving a lot of their operations to Texas, for example. And, that wasn't sufficient. So then they had this ban, and now the Trump administration is talking about this joint venture. But so many American companies that went into a joint venture with China, Dow Chemical, solar panel companies, auto companies, all of them would enter into these joint ventures and get all of their IP hacked. So it didn't do anything. It just kept them, getting these short-term profits without realizing that their long-term viability was just going down the drain every single day. So I don't think a joint venture is necessarily the answer here. But we're seeing these really sophisticated attacks on American company systems that we all use every day, all day. So, is the threat higher from a Chinese-owned company than from Chinese hackers breaking into Verizon, which they're doing, and we haven't gotten them out? Like, at this point, what's the delta on that? But I do think it's I didn't use TikTok for a long time, and then I really felt like I was missing a lot of stuff going into the election, so I finally downloaded it. I also don't think the U.S. can just ban TikTok. I think you need to have like certain parameters or criteria that you would say, if a company meets this threshold, then we have the ability to ban it. Because what did we do when there was this threat that TikTok was going to go away? Everyone went to Red Note. And had some nice conversations, it sounds like. But anyway, it's these are not easy issues. There's no black and white solutions. There's no like ban or don't ban. With DeepSeek, like, good luck banning it. It's, if we ban it in the United States, it's still in the supply chain, right? So that's the problem, is these things, it's so complicated so quickly, but it's impossible to retroactively rip it out.
Oh, go ahead.
If you were to go back to the New York Times and you were covering the NSA, what would you be looking for around Tulsi Gabbard?
Great question. I find that to be a particularly dangerous nominee. I would just be looking for, I'd probably be trying to find everyone I could at the lower levels of the organization to get in touch with them, to get an early alert system going on. Has the tasking changed? Is the reporting changing? Where is the is there a shift in priorities, basically, away from what Russia is doing, what other countries she's sympathized publicly with are doing, to basically handicap our ability to get a sense for what's going on. That would probably be what I would do.
I had a sort of a general interest question. Just what is the most common unsafe practice that you've encountered people who are seemingly knowledgeable about this subject doing anyway?
That's a good one. I think the main thing is not using Signal for your sensitive communications at this point. Most of the people who are pretty entrenched in cyber are pretty good about using MFA. I think the number one piece of advice I always give people is you actually can't secure everything. It's just impossible. I've gone through these phases where I've gone full Claire from Homeland, or what is it? What's her name? Homeland. And then I'm like, I need diapers, Amazon. They still have my address. It's just so hard. So what I tell people is whatever your crown jewels are at an individual level, maybe it's my kids' photos that if I got ransomware and they were destroyed, I'd be pretty upset. Whatever that is, and if you're at a Fortune 500 company, maybe it's your formula for your genetically modified seeds or whatever it is. Whatever that thing is, spend a lot of time, energy, and resources securing that one thing, and having fallback systems for that one thing. So if it's my kids' photos, it's just backing them up every once in a while. If it's the genetically modified seed thing, then it's making sure that it's on a disparate system with extra security, and anyone who logs into that is audited all of the time, and they only get access to it on a need-to-know basis, and that need-to-know basis lasts 30 seconds or 3 minutes, and then it's gone. It's that kind of thinking. And I think, unfortunately, there are a lot of organizations out there that are just still kind of doing the CYA, go through the motions of security without really thinking about it from that sort of layered approach. And I think that's probably the biggest one.
There's people online.
I don't mean to cut in front of anyone else. If anyone else wants to go. Hi, Nicole. Sandeep, I was in Anat Admati's class. Thank you so much for speaking. You mentioned that the U.S. government has given a really good has not given a good reason for why TikTok should be banned on a technical specifications level. I've been thinking about this, and I've been also looking at how all all major FANG companies kind of cozied up to Trump, and we're sitting on the dais right next to him and stuff. And a lot of that looks very similar to how China treats its major tech companies. I was thinking about rather than just a barefaced adversarial attack on U.S. government, either through an intelligence apparatus or an actual cyber attack, to what degree would you say the simple banning of TikTok is to deny it sorry, I'm not speaking clearly. China uses its digital infrastructure, Huawei and everything around the world, for coercive and concessional advantage. To say, we are investing this much in your countries, give us stuff, or let us have influence in your country. To what degree would you say Trump, to the extent that we can predict his thinking, is kind of trying to mirror that, and the U.S. government is trying to mirror that same aspect by kind of bringing all the tech companies together, mapping, like Google has a bunch of deep sea cables, Meta has a bunch of deep sea cables, Amazon has AWS, and using that same, it's less about cyber attacks and more about economic statecraft and coercive and concessional leverage. Would you say, do we have any thoughts on that, or just less from the cyber attack angle?
There's a lot to unpack there. I think, no, it's okay. A lot of those same CEOs showed up to kiss the ring when Xi Jinping came, and In a lot of cases, he wasn't treating them that well either. So, I mean, in general, I've been really dismayed by this whole new trend of kissing the ring that we're saying. Nate and I were talking about it. I said, so which CEO up there, like, broke your heart the hardest, And we both were like, Tim Cook, that was pretty hard. And, I don't know. I mean, you could look at that same question in the context of USAID. Like, when I think about USAID, and I think about China's Belt and Road Initiative, China's Belt and Road Initiative was built in many ways to emulate the success of USAID, to give it soft power and influence in Africa and all of these places, so that, they would, and also then to use the digital Silk Road, Huawei, ZTE, China's digital backbone, which then gave it a surveillance advantage, a potential for a kill switch, gave it real influence. I'll tell you the story. There was a story in Costa Rica, I think it was, where the president decided to ban Huawei. This was very recent. And all of a sudden, he just starts getting eaten alive by local media. Really unexpected, actually, local media. Turns out they're all owned by China now. So, all these things can kind of like flip the switch and then kind of hold you hostage in a way that you didn't realize. And so, I kind of think of the question more around like on coercion. Like, we're really shooting ourselves in the foot right now with this very like abrupt withdrawal from USAID, and it kind of gives China more room to maneuver, I guess, is the nice way to say it. So I don't know. I mean, I can't believe we're here. Like, I can't believe what as someone said, it wasn't the CEO of Caterpillar sitting on stage during the inauguration. It was the attention, influence, information economy. I really have just been, I haven't even processed it. I've just been really dismayed by the whole thing. So.
I think that's it, but hopefully, again, because Nicole is investing in amazing defensive companies, and we're here in the Valley with some, incredible innovators, and there's a lot, to be optimistic about. And thank you, Nicole, for really, being at the forefront of shining a light on this issue, and something that, got me interested in the topic initially when I was first getting out of college. And so thank you, everyone, for being here and for your great questions. And thank you, Nicole, seriously, for taking the time. It was amazing.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I'm in the neighborhood, so I'm happy to come back anytime. It's really great to be with you all.
Thank you.